So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Todd Eby, who is co-founder of Success Hacker. Hi, Todd. How you doing?
Great. How are you doing, Adrian?
I am splendid, sir. I am splendid. So, Todd, for the benefit of our listeners and readers, can you tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about the work that you do?
Sure. So I'm a 24 plus year veteran of the sales, services, and customer success space, primarily in B2B and B2C high-tech software.
Mm-hmm.
I've spent the primary, the primary place where I've spent the bulk of my career has been in large-scale telecom for companies like Genesis and Lucent.
Mm-hmm.
And then recently, I really shifted focus after realizing that there was more on the horizon and started looking to sort of engage not just the B2B space, but the B2C. And so I went to a small startup called Zenefits, which was an interesting experience and a story all unto itself.
Mm-hmm.
But it really opened my eyes to sort of the differences between B2B and B2C, but also how they were sort of this interesting kind of mix of different tactics, but equally applicable in both space.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a great time. I did some really interesting things around creating a implementation team that could really handle a high volume B2C business, and that was really sort of the thing that attracted me. It was sort of the puzzle that I just couldn't pass up on.
Right.
In terms of what I do, I sort of alluded to some of it there obliquely, but in essence, what I and Success Hacker by extension do is work with early to mid-stage companies primarily on understanding what customer success is, but not just the what and the why. We focus primarily on the how. There's been a truly amazing amount of material written and spoken about in terms of customer success and why it's important, particularly in light of sort of this shift to the subscription economy. And the challenge that is out there is not one of understanding why you need to do it any longer. It's more on the practical nuts and bolts side of how do you actually do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting to see sort of how many folks are struggling with taking written word, blogs, etc., and attempting to sort of convert those 750 words into something that actually fits their business. And they struggle a lot with that. And so Success Hacker was created and founded around the idea that somebody needed to really enter into the market and help folks that were struggling to understand what their how was and how to achieve it. And so we've been working with a lot of companies to get sort of the foundational elements in place, the things that enable them to not only deliver delight to their customers, but also save themselves a tremendous amount of headaches and pain. We don't want them to have to reinvent the wheel. We've been doing this for 20 plus years, both my co-founder and I. And so we've sort of taken all the different things that we've learned, both the good lessons and the bad. At the very least, some lessons can teach you what not to do, and there's a tremendous amount of value in that. And then exposed it to companies and through our community to the broader customer success industry to talk about, here's sort of the foundational things that you need to think about and you need to get in place before you start swinging for the fences. And it's been a really interesting journey. We founded last year in February, and we've been working with, we've been speaking with hundreds of folks, working with about 20 plus companies, and helping sort of the industry as a whole through our community to start to understand sort of the approach that we're recommending folks take and the results that they'll get from it.
Okay. Now, I mean, because I came across you because I was put onto a kind of webinar that you did with the folks at Amity. and it was called "The Future of Customer Success is Agile." And I was really attracted to the title because I just recently have just completed a conference talk that was focused on the contact center, the future of the contact center, in fact, and it was talking about why is agile not in the contact center, and that's kind of what kind of caught my eye. This idea that you combine customer success with agile. But before we can get stuck into that, I mean, perhaps you could clear up some potential kind of misunderstanding or understanding, or help people understand what is customer success. I mean, is it in simple terms sort of loyalty and retention for B2B and particularly B2B SaaS software firms, or is it more to it than that?
So, I think it's interesting. There are a lot of different definitions of what customer success is, and you can really look at it from a variety of different viewpoints.
Mm-hmm.
Some folks consider it an organization in the company. Some folks consider it a mindset. Some consider it a philosophy, and the list goes on.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that I would first say is that customer success isn't just about B2B or just about SaaS.
Right.
I think the thing that folks have to understand about customer success is it's equally applicable to your mom and pop shop around the corner as it is to somebody like an Oracle or a Zuora.
Okay.
So whether or not you're a huge company or a small company, at the core, it's about understanding why your customer hired you.
Okay.
What are they attempting to achieve through your product or service offering?
Mm-hmm.
And then getting them to that point. So we ascribe to a lot of jobs to be done type of thinking, and it really kind of focuses on that core element of why did you hire me?
Okay.
Help me to understand what your definition of success looks like and enable me to deliver that by really clearly outlining for me what you hope to accomplish. What is the result that you're looking for? People don't buy products, they buy a result.
Yeah.
And so uncovering that is really at sort of the core of our approach to customer success. That's not to say that other folks don't have a working definition that applies to their sort of particular approach really well. But for us, it's really about our success only comes out of the customer's success.
Right.
So if you enable them to achieve their desired end result, then by extension, you should be successful because they're going to either recommend you, expand usage of you, continue to renew, what have you. And that doesn't necessarily have to just be, as I said earlier, focused on subscription-based software. It can be, something as simple as a freelancer applying customer success principles to get return customers.
Mm-hmm.
So, broadly applicable, but really focused on understanding what the customer's desired result is and delivering it. And then continuing to deliver it, obviously, if you're in a subscription-based business, or demonstrating that there is additional areas of opportunity if you don't have a subscription-based business and you're selling them sort of a one-off offering out of a full menu of different things that you can do.
Okay, and so based on the sort of description you've just given us around customer success, does that mean that the person or the team that's responsible for this, they should have a focus that is both external and on the customer, but also internal and on the company and what needs to improve in order to enable future success?
Absolutely. I think I categorically agree with the statement. I would expand on it to say that the challenge is a lot of folks focus on it being one person. And one of the things that I think is really important is that, and it can certainly start there. So you have a change agent and they look at it from that perspective, both internal and external.
Mm-hmm.
And they really look at not just the customer aspects, but also what are we doing internally to make sure that we're making our customers successful or not putting roadblocks in place. But I think, and this is one of the things that kind of goes back to that statement I made earlier about sort of the different ways of looking at customer success. I really consider customer success to be more of an umbrella term.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, I think the industry is moving in this direction. Not as quickly as I would like to see, but that we all consider ourselves, the old adage is everybody's selling. I think everybody's in customer success as well.
Mm-hmm.
It starts from the point that you conceive of this thing, this product that you're offering. And so it has to be woven into the fabric of your organization, your company,
Mm-hmm.
and whatever it is you're offering. You could be offering the best widget in the world, but if it's amazingly difficult to use, well, then that's going to introduce friction into the journey towards success. So you need to really look at that. So I would advocate that you need to look at it and the different things that sort of get built into the end result that you're looking for.
Yeah.
From the product perspective, from the marketing perspective, how you're selling it, how you're servicing it. So everybody's job is success.
Yeah.
Now, the teams that are deeply enmeshed in that, perhaps post-sale, is where you're seeing most of the thought kind of coming about or being focused on. But I would advocate that sales is really starting to see the benefit of customer success and customer success focused thinking. Some of the thought leaders in the space are thinking about how can we better align the way that we sell with delivering customer success.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're starting to see the bridges being made between product and sort of the post-sale customer success teams so that they have the ability to take in the feedback that's coming through the success team that's interfacing with the customers and really getting sort of that true voice of the customer input back into the product.
Yeah.
Marketing is obviously, a big part of this as well, and they're really starting to get involved with attempting to understand sort of, are we marketing in the right way? Is there something that we could do that would help our customers to ultimately be more successful?
Mm-hmm.
And it just continues to kind of expand from there on until you see everybody kind of understanding and acknowledging that they have a role to play.
Mm-hmm.
I think the challenges for folks when they're first starting out, if that's not in the DNA of the company, being that change agent. So it starts with one person oftentimes, but it really needs to be more of a team sport.
Mm-hmm. So I think that what's kind of interesting, and that going back to the kind of the webinar and the title of the webinar, is that so this is quite a new and quite an emerging sort of area of focus or industry or field or whatever however you want to describe it.
All of the above.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was kind of curious for you to kind of for the title of the webinar to be about the future of customer success is agile, because I was thinking, so it's kind of started as being not agile, and that's kind of what made me interested. I mean, can you help me understand kind of why it needs to be more agile? The future is agile, and as opposed to kind of what it is kind of now. What does it suffer from?
Sure. So it's a bit more than just a catchy headline, although you do write those to grab folks' attention. Job done, it seems.
Exactly. Tick.
So, in essence, what I was sort of attempting to do was provoke some folks to come and look at what we were laying out, but also to sort of look at themselves in the mirror and try and identify the way in which they're approaching success today. You can't really say that the current approach to customer success is waterfall, and that's bad, and we should move to something more agile. I would actually argue that the current approach to customer success is lacking in rigor, and far too often for early stage or even later stage high growth companies, it's more akin to, oh my God, I have X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, A, B, C problems, and the list keeps growing, and I don't have a really good way of addressing them. And at the same time, I'm trying to address the change that's coming about as we are wildly successful in the marketplace, and the company's growing and we're adding more folks. And it's just this sort of whirlwind of activity that distracts you from being able to really focus on a rigorous approach to building something. So your day job gets in the way of doing sort of the macro level day job, if you'll follow me in that analogy.
Yeah.
And so what I was essentially kind of putting forward was that we lack a real defined path forward. As you know, there are a plethora of different frameworks when you look at topics like ITIL or sort of solution governance, if you will,
Sure.
not to use an acronym, and things like development, and then even in marketing and copywriting, there's all these different frameworks. There's things that you can go and look at and use to get the result that you're trying to achieve, whether it be a really well-defined framework or a simple 3-step think about things this way. Customer success doesn't really have that. There are beginnings of it here and there, but there's not sort of one de facto way forward. And coming out of this cycle that we had just gone through in 2016, where we were really looking to sort of define our approach, our framework to how we look at success and how it should be delivered, I realized that what we were really espousing with our approach, which is sort of a adaptation of growth hacking techniques, that are guided by sort of a high-level framework that tells you where to focus first and sort of works like a layer cake to build you up to the point where you're ready to really kind of look at continuous improvement and automation. As a side note, that a lot of that came about because the predominant sort of approach that a lot of people are taking is they want to hit the easy button. They started out doing things with Excel and elbow grease. They grew, and now they realize that there's all these different dimensions that they have to think about and improve and work on, and they think, oh, I'll just get a tool and it will solve everything. And so we were creating this framework to sort of encapsulate our thinking on that, which is tools are great, but don't adopt them too early or they actually become more of a hindrance. And so we were sort of laying out this steady approach to building out those foundations that would get you ready for a tool and give you a fighting chance when you went to implement it. The idea being that implementing anything at scale is a pain. Customer success is really iterative. What you do today may not work in as little as 3 months, maybe even shorter time period than that. And so if you find yourself trying to deploy this tool and you're changing things, material things, as you're going, all of a sudden you're in this never-ending redeployment cycle. And so we were trying to educate folks around sort of get yourself to a stable point first, iterate through the different things that you're going to have to change until you get to a fairly stable point, and then consider looking at tools. And so through all of that, we were really kind of espousing this agile approach without really going just flat out and saying you should be using agile. And part of that's due to my background. I spent some time sort of at the end of my time at Genesis doing, I cutely call it applied research and development. We were part of an initiative to build sort of this new product based on what customers were really saying they wanted, recognizing that we had a dominant place in the market, but unfortunately we had kind of gone about achieving that dominant place in a way where we kind of sold everything we had to sell. And so we needed to create something new that customers wanted to sell. Long story short, after doing 20 plus interviews with the vertical that we were focusing on, just happened to be banking, we arrived at the conclusion that they didn't want an add-on to the existing product. They wanted a complete revamp of the product. And so, you have a small team that makes this sudden realization, and you have this driving time frame and obviously the funding to make things happen, but your ask just went from being sort of, you know, smaller than you would normally think was a big strategic initiative, sort of a plug-in, if you will, or maybe an expansion, to this thing that was way bigger than a breadbasket. And we were stuck because we didn't have a lot of development resources, and we recognized that we needed to do something that would enable us to achieve this lofty goal in the time frame that we had with limited resources. And so that was back right around the time that Agile was really just kind of starting to get going. Mm-hmm. And I happened across it and went and got trained and certified. And since then have found that it sort of creeps into everything that I do, because it's a really solid approach to dealing with those constrained situations. And then sort of fast forward to the work we were doing on the framework, and I started to really realize that, wait, okay, we've been talking about it. Let's actually just call it what it is. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of the beginning of the premise for the future of success is Agile. Okay. Because what we found was
can I reflect on that a minute? I mean, I think so here's a couple of things. One, you're talking about this, we're talking about frameworks and models and so on and so forth, and tools and all that sort of stuff. And people think that they get those things, mm-hmm. and they get their tools, and then they go, and it might be an agile tool or an agile framework, and then they go, aha, they sit back and they go, haha, we're now agile, but yet they're not. And because, and then also the idea around kind of this not telling people where to go or giving them the answer, because it seems to me that what you're almost advocating is this idea that you have to go learn by doing, so it has to be experiential, and therefore the strategy in many ways, or the approach, has to be emergent. And because mm-hmm. one of the most important elements of it is not necessarily having the framework and kind of knowing what to do, it's the doing, and then the resilience that comes from the doing.
So I think that's a great way of packaging it up. And one of the challenges is, yes, you're spot on when you say that a lot of the actual work of customer success is discovered experientially and through the doing. Yeah. The challenge was, in sort of the current state of customer success, is that doing is oftentimes fairly chaotic. It's fits and starts. You sort of hit this realization after you talk with a lot of different companies that they will sort of build up these big bang projects and then get really confused as to why they weren't able to get them across the line. When you look at the size of their team, it's 10 to 15 people. All of them have a day job, and they're expecting them to do this on top of it. And they don't give them any sort of a construct to prioritize or break it down. And so, the experience is it's pretty painful. Yeah. And so what we were essentially landing upon was, frameworks are great. What we really need was sort of this container to say, okay, here's a way forward. Like, we understand that your situation is dynamic and things are always changing, and that there's never enough time and there's never enough resources. That's just sort of the default state of being for a lot of companies. And so what we were advocating is, rather than try and create massive project plans or do strategic initiatives where you only could give up a small fraction of your time, and you were in essence making small steps forward, but at such a rate that ultimately when you finished the project, it was no longer relevant. Instead, what we were looking at was this situation where we could give folks a path forward, a sort of a container to put their efforts into, and a way of proceeding that gave them the ability to deliver results in small bite-sized chunks, to keep focused on sort of the end goal, understand sort of the constraints that they had with their resources and sort of give them this ability to have accountability that was really lacking.
Mm-hmm.
And so Agile sort of ticked all those boxes. And it was really interesting when you start talking with folks about how do you organize what you're attempting to do, the different sort of answers that you got. And then when you would sort of pose, if it did this and if you could do this, would that really work for you? And it was resoundingly a yes. And so it was more a matter of kind of bringing this to the front and saying, I think this is the way that folks should look at it, given the environment that we exist in.
Mm-hmm.
Give this a shot because we feel like it's going to give you measurable benefits. And so that's sort of where the thinking about it being the future originated from, if you will.
And it all seems that and the thing that actually excited me out of anything of the webinar was how all of this thinking, all this experience has sort of bubbled up into sort of what you call an agile success manifesto, which is effectively a derivation of the agile manifesto as it historically stands. But it'd be interesting to tell me, for you to tell us, and it's based on sort of basically 5 principles effectively. But can you tell me a little bit more about those kind of principles and the kind of the what they kind of point to, or I guess the principles or priorities or both, but tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So, when you really look at the Agile movement, and obviously it started in development, but you could see the applicability elsewhere because it was just a really good way of sort of unpacking the challenges of work in a dynamic environment.
Yeah.
You could no longer build these huge monolithic initiatives and expect them to get done by people that were doing something else. So in essence, sort of part-time staff. And so, as you kind of look at how development addressed that through this new Agile manifesto, the correlation between sort of the state that I mentioned earlier that success is in and the state that sort of drove the development of the Agile manifesto, there were just unmistakable parallels.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was sort of the genesis of the thinking. Now, obviously, the customer success manifesto is derived directly from what you see in the Agile Success Manifesto, with a few minor changes, but realistically, it was so well said, there's not a whole lot that needs to be changed.
Yeah.
And the core principles were really, they're really powerful. They really do sort of speak to me, and I think to others, in terms of sort of the state of affairs that we'd like to operate in.
Yeah.
I haven't had anybody go, no, that's definitely not what we want to have our team be like. Mm-hmm. And sort of the core principles hold really true. And so, when we started talking about that, it was really clear that, we had something that would, in essence, give teams this sort of guiding light, if you will.
Yeah.
And it focused on the voice of the customer, being proactive, an iterative approach over sort of big strategy, keyed into the concept that your growth, your change is going to be or should be through experimentation and data. So sort of an empirical approach to the path forward. Don't make assumptions and fall in love with an idea of what you believe is going to work, and then implement it, and then just sort of dogmatically focus on that when the customers are kind of going in a completely opposite direction. And then last but not least, internal collaboration. One of the key tenets, and it kind of goes back to what I said about success being everybody's job, is getting folks to understand that and getting them to want to work with you and building that organizational trust that's going to make it so that the teams are able to function not as silos, but as one sort of extended virtual team. Yeah. And so, it all really kind of spoke to me. And I, we sort of tweaked it. We took some of the beginnings from some work that Chad Hornfeld had done, and he had sort of surfaced back in, I believe it was 2013 or 2014 now that I think about it, yeah. Where he was kind of talking about how he was using Agile with his own team. And so, I think it was really powerful. And it really resonates with folks. Now, when you take it beyond that and you kind of go into sort of what you see with the core principles of Agile, it continues to sort of really resonate with everybody. And then you expose them to sort of the simple, practical way in which it works. Mm-hmm. And folks go, yeah, why wouldn't we do that? I mean, it's not super complicated, and the results are amazing. Sure. And you just look at the number of success stories that are out there focused on Agile, and you can start to really picture yourself in them. And that's really powerful because folks are really looking for a way to sort of get above the turmoil, the whirlwind, and start really getting things done, because they know ultimately if they only work on what's in front of them, they'll fall down on their strategic goals, and then, to put a real personal note on it, their job is at risk. Sure. And we see that time and time again with customer success leaders. Their average life expectancy is less than 2 years in a role, because there are wild expectations out there based on everything that you see in the market and the challenge that they have, and sort of then they get in place and they're attempting to sort of right this ship. And that's a separate job in addition to sort of building something that's going to take the long haul. And then, you have a team. Yeah. And so you have all these things you have to manage, and doing that without a framework that kind of holds you true to your North Star is really challenging.
Yeah. So I think that the thing I really like about the Agile Success Manifesto, I mean, if I go through the principles, is that the voice of the customer over assumptions, proactive over reactive, iteration over big strategy, experimentation and data over opinions and conventions, internal collaboration over one-way communication. I mean, to me, that just smacks of almost a set of principles that allow you to just do good work on a daily basis. And that,
exactly.
And it means that it allows you to get past almost get past history and actually allow you to evolve rather than getting stuck. And so I think that, I can understand why people engage kind of with that. And I find it kind of challenging that the lifespan of customer success managers is only about 2 years, or less than kind of 2 years, and it feels to me that sort of smacks of they've sort of bought the role, but they haven't bought the concept.
Well, it's in that time frame is really in particular for the leaders. Right. Less about the managers themselves, but the CSMs themselves. The leaders, they have this challenge where they're brought in and expected to, in essence, work miracles. And oftentimes there's not truly an appreciation of the sheer scope of the challenges that are sort of leading up to what's actually happening. So you only see the tip of the iceberg, right? Mm-hmm. And then when you sort of unpack it all and you get down to brass tacks and you see sort of all the things that are feeding into what's showing above the waterline, you realize that, whoa, we've got a much more systemic challenge. Yeah. And so, it's really a challenge, I think, if you don't come in with your eyes wide open and you don't set expectations and you don't have a real way of sort of exposing, like increasing the transparency of what actually is going on and producing the challenges. Yeah. So that was why, another reason why the Agile approach was so interesting. But back to your point on the manifesto, one of the things that I found really interesting is you go into a lot of companies and they have their mission, vision, and values, right? And a lot of them live them and breathe them, but a lot of the companies just, they're a card or a poster on the wall, and the employees don't really connect with them. And so when I look at sort of the manifesto, I can really see some things that we value that are not in dispute.
Yeah.
That there's clear and tangible value. And like you said, it's a way that we work. And that makes it, I think, easy for folks to really grasp those values and leverage them to get their work done. And so,
And,
in a way,
and do work that matters as well.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I think that there's here's a story that comes from I spoke to a CEO of a company, and also, I guess, what you would call his customer success manager, although I don't know if that's what they actually kind of called him at the time, but it is a success story around customer success. And this company has, put the story in the book because I did the interview about a year or so ago, and they've probably got the best name ever of any firm in the world. And the name is Big Ass Fans.
I have some in the house. I love them.
Okay. So Corey Smith is the CEO, and he employed, I think, a chap's name was David Schwartz or something, and as his first guy said, go and basically solve customer problems. And that was their strategy, and it basically helped them grow their business by sixfold, I think, over the course of about 5 or 6 years. Went from about $40 million to about $175 million. Pretty much doing that. And so it can be done, but as you rightly say and rightly point out, it's a lot to do with getting the support from leadership to be able to go and do the work that needs to get done.
Absolutely. Well, and it's also showing them, you get the support first, then you get the buy-in that the problem is this big, and then you have to show them how you're going to solve that, given that they're not going to give you a blank check.
Yeah.
And so it really gives them that way forward. Plus, the practices give you this level of transparency to show we're making progress. Here's what we've accomplished. You have to be able to sort of demo each deliverable, each work product. And so it's this constant reinforcement of we are making progress. Here are the things that are challenges. Here are the resources involved. And so you can have this, multidimensional conversation around what if we did this? Would we see more focus, more progress in this area? If we added people, if we changed the focus. So you can kind of look at it and pull the different levers and be able to see what would happen. And that's something that's lacking from a lot of the conversations, because folks are talking about we're doing X and they haven't broken it down into small bite-sized chunks. So you're constantly waiting for the finished product, and patience is not infinite.
Yeah, no, sure. And it's also kind of I guess the timeline gets longer and the kind of financial ask gets bigger, and and then sometimes I guess. So I was also talking to somebody recently about this kind of the whole topic around proving kind of the ROI of investments in CX generally, and also CX, particularly CX technology, and that there's a lack of I feel like understanding, but also kind of experimentation and testing to prove the case, and it almost becomes like a one size fits all in many ways, because I guess in many ways, if I think about it, is like that's almost how people do things in many businesses. And that's kind of why I think kind of the agile approach is really interesting, because it is iterative. It is about experimentation. It goes all the way back to a Deming kind of Checkland learning cycle. Check, plan, do, check, plan, do type thing. And because what's the most important thing in a business is that its ability to learn and to adapt and to evolve. And so I think that's kind of one of the really interesting kind of elements of this kind of whole thing is this, but also it's an element that some people struggle to get to because they've got to almost release themselves from the way that they do things in their current environment.
Mm-hmm. I'd say that's a fair statement. It's also they've looked at sort of what everyone else is doing,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to do that because they want the result. And it was really interesting last year. Tal Safani, the CCO for Base CRM, did a presentation and then a follow-on blog post for us. And one of the key slides, and it's one of my favorite because it was just really provocative, it said, "Don't do weed," and had the obvious image, as you would expect. And, it was an attention grabber, right? But underneath it all, it was saying, don't do what everybody else is doing and expect different results.
Yeah.
Think.
Yes.
Think about what you're trying to do and then arrive at a path that's going to get you there. But also think about sort of what are the things that are necessary to accomplish along that path. And so, one of the reasons why I wanted him to convert that presentation into a blog post is I thought it was a really good sort of primer on shifting your mindset so that, you kind of get out of your own way to sort of cap on what you had just stated.
Yeah. So, Todd, I mean, we've got into a lot of kind of detail, but if I was to say to you, given what you know and given what we've talked about, and if one of our listeners or readers is saying, right, I like the idea of customer success, we may have a customer success team, or I'm just interested in generating more success for my customers, and I like this idea of being a bit more kind of agile about it. I mean, where should they start? What should they do first?
Great question. And I always advise folks, start small.
Okay.
Full stop. The best way to start with...
How small?
How small? Well, so the best way to get started on this is there's a couple of different approaches that may work, but in essence, the best way to get started is to take a list of, and we'll just throw out a number, 10 things. 10's a great number.
Mm-hmm.
And they can be derived from any number of sources, whether you have your current Net Promoter Score survey results and you have the comments that are encapsulated there. If you've created buckets for those and you sort of have a variety of buckets and challenges, that's one place to sort of source the 10 things that you want to work on. But in essence, what I espouse to get folks really, really motivated is to pick their headaches, the things that if they could only remove them from sort of the ongoing efforts, if they could remove them, how much better would life be?
Sure.
And so, typically that makes it something that they're really motivated to do. And you can get to those, like I said, through the survey results, or another exercise that I like to do when I'm working with a customer that's kind of stuck is like to bring everybody into a room, give them all a set of sticky notes, and then say, okay, right, I'm going to give you 10 minutes. Write down the 5 to 7 ways that you know of right now that you're pissing off your customers.
Right.
And so they write them down, stick them on the desk in front of them, and then everybody takes a turn at the whiteboard, putting their stickers up on the board and explaining what they mean. And then you kind of go through a bucketization exercise to kind of group them, prioritize them, and that kind of gives you the starting point.
Right.
In essence, any way that you arrive at your list, I'd recommend getting a list of 10 things. They don't have to be in priority order. They just have to be the things that you want to work on that you know will benefit your customers and you, removing headaches, kind of smoothing the path forward. Take those and then look at them from sort of an individual standpoint and sort of arrive at the point of how big is this thing. Mm-hmm. If it's, for instance, we need to completely rework the way that we onboard our customers using our product. Well, that's probably a pretty big initiative, right? That is an initiative all on its own. So the next step is break it down into smaller chunks And sort of the goal is start to create a backlog from these 10 things. Start to create stories, whether they be user stories or job stories, that kind of, when all put together, deliver you that one thing that was pretty big from your list. And some things can be small. Ideally, your first 10 items should be small to mid-size elements. You don't want to try and boil the ocean on your first go.
Yeah.
Break them down into stories, kind of encapsulate them into bite-sized chunks that you could pick off, knowing that you're probably going to give yourself an iteration time frame of somewhere between 1 and 3 weeks, knowing that everybody has a day job. And so sort of build your backlog, build up your stories, agree on how long you're going to work at sort of the sprint itself.
Yeah.
And then sort of sit down as a group and say, okay, there are 5 of us, how many ever there are. I can dedicate how much time to working on this in addition to my other duties. And then kind of arrive at some sort of an hour or day decision in terms of available time. And then really look at the things that are on your list and say, okay, which ones are the top priorities? Okay, what's the first thing? And start picking things off and kind of construct a sprint backlog.
Okay.
And then have at it.
Yeah. Go for it. Nice.
Work at it for the time frame. Typically 2 weeks is where most teams kind of settle initially. Obviously you have to arrive at sort of who's going to be the servant leader for the group. That's a really key role. It's called a Scrum Master in sort of the typical Scrum-based approach.
Yep.
Silly name, but it's a really serious role. In essence, what their job is to do is they remove impediments. So they keep folks on track. They'll run the daily stand-ups.
Yep.
Everybody gets together for 15 to 30 minutes, no more than 30 minutes, to talk about what they did yesterday, what they're working on today, and to surface any challenges they have. Any challenges that they have, that servant leader role, that Scrum Master, helps them to resolve them. Basically, pile through your first iteration, arrive at a product. So each one of the stories that you pull off has to have some definite endpoint, and it has to produce something that you can show, even if it's only a spreadsheet or it's a set of basic business rules. Whatever it is, it has to be something that's demonstrable.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a piece of working code. This isn't development.
Yeah.
But if you go through that process and you try it out for 2 weeks, I think you're going to see that you're actually able to get things done, or you're going to see that, wait, this was a blocker.
Yeah.
And whether that be an actual physical blocker, like you're relying on somebody else, or the fact that I have 300 accounts and I'm already 90+% utilized, you're going to learn something through that cycle.
Yeah.
And that's really, that experiential learning is probably the best way to get started. And what you're going to come away with is probably a mixed bag of results, because it's your first sprint. The first one is, it's never a beautiful piece, it's never a work of art, right?
No.
You'll learn some things. I would recommend, while you're doing that, there's a lot of different things that you can read to help you. But I don't recommend that you go out and that you get the 500 and some odd page Agile book and try to dogmatically follow it. This is sort of getting your feet wet, and try that cycle for 2 to 4 iterations and work towards sort of getting it more ingrained with that small group of folks. And then sort of at the end of that cycle, take a step back and see what you were able to achieve, and if you've made measurable progress and what you've learned, and sort of do a retrospective on the overall experience and make a decision if it's for you. Agile's not for everybody, but I think you'll find that if you take that approach and you get started in that way, that you'll start to see the benefits rather rapidly. Probably about the time that you enter into your second sprint, you're going to be starting to see ways that you could adapt sort of the different things that you're doing and what you have in the backlog, and find sort of what I refer to as smart cuts to kind of get to the end product that you want
Yeah.
in new and creative ways. The nice thing is that it's a fairly small time commitment. It gives you that transparency, allows you to be able to see the progress you're making, and it gives you a container to say, like, this is what we bit off. Is it more than we could chew? We had X number of people. If we had 3 more, we would have been able to address this. So you start to sort of really understand the levers and what it could mean if you expanded the scope to sort of the full-scale team.
Perfect. It's interesting because I've just gone through I'm going through a similar kind of process with, funnily enough, a law firm, which is fascinating. But it's all about kind of improving their service, not about making the law better. I hasten to add, agile on the law, I think, would be slightly different. But anyway,
I would love to see that.
Yeah. So, Todd, that's great. Some great sort of advice and great detail in there, and that's brilliant. But so I'm just conscious of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift to my 2 last kind of questions that I always ask.
Sure.
And so the penultimate question is pretty much my own bit of market research that I've been doing over the last kind of year, following on from the publication of my book, sort of How to Wow, last year. And I've been asking people for their own perspective of what wow service or experience means to them. So I'd be really interested to hear your perspective on that.
Well, and I was really looking forward to this question when I saw it. It's kind of interesting because sort of the approach that we recommend for working with early stage companies, and as I mentioned earlier, it's success hacking. It's very akin to growth marketing and growth hacking itself. And one of the success hacks that we have is around the frugal wow and sort of strategic gifting. And so for us, sort of the wow experience, it varies across the different sort of companies that we've worked with. And so, for instance, it could be something as simple as if you have a really highly technical, extremely complex solution where it takes a lot of effort to troubleshoot things. It could be as simple as giving the person who's been stuck on the phone with you for 2 hours lunch by surprise. That's a great simple wow, where if you order them a pizza and they get a knock on the server room door, they're kind of blown out of their seat because you basically have been keeping them through lunch. They're motivated to get this done because it's probably something that's mission critical. So that's a simple example at the really grassroots level. I think from a more strategic level, we've been working with a partner on sort of a strategic gifting approach, leveraging some great thinking that they've been doing around, how do you use wow experiences, in particular, the gifting aspect of it, to sort of move things forward. And so, that's one other dimension of it. But I think wow experience in total, it's a challenge. If you look at sort of the master of the wow experience, that's, I think a lot of folks would say somebody like Disney, where they have really looked at every dimension of what it is they're attempting to accomplish, and they've surrounded it, each one of the objectives, with just as much as possible a flawless experience, so that there's always this kind of concept of delight. And so for me, I really look at the wow experience being something that doesn't just happen by accident. It's highly engineered, and it takes a lot of thought, and it really requires you to have some really deep insights into what's going to be meaningful to your customers, because sending them a t-shirt with your logo on it is now not a wow experience.
No. Thank you. So that brings me to my last question that I always ask at the end of these podcasts. And the question is this. Todd, is there anything that you would like to shamelessly plug?
There are a lot of things that I'd love to shamelessly plug. I think for us, there's a couple of key things that are going to be happening in the not too distant future, or are already sort of in the offing. So if I can maybe plug a couple of things quickly.
Oh, come on then.
One is our customer success community. So if you're interested in customer success and you'd like to collaborate and get inspired by other folks and ask questions, connect, check out customersuccess.community. It's called Outcomes. We launched it last year, and it's been growing like a weed, and we believe that our members are getting a tremendous amount of value. We really try and drive folks to get their sort of burning questions out there, and get the community engaged to help them to understand what they could try, what's been tried, and what's failed, why that happened. And so it's a great place for customer success managers and leaders alike to go and really connect with others around the things that are most important to them. So that's kind of shameless plug number one. Shameless plug number two is for an upcoming customer success conference. Gainsight does their Pulse conference every year. We will be there as a sponsor, but also we are going to be leading the education day, which happens right before the conference, the day before the conference actually kicks off. So if you want to come and engage with us around how to be a better CSM, or how to leverage our approach to customer success to build a solid foundation for a customer success program, we have 2 tracks there, and we'd love to have you join us. Again, that's Gainsight Pulse.
Okay.
Be a great conference. Not a vendor conference. It's truly an industry conference.
Okay.
And then last but not least, check out successhacker.co. We are embarked on this journey to help folks find the how of delivering customer success. We work with early to mid-stage companies primarily, but we don't limit ourselves, and we'd love to help you to understand sort of how to get past some of your day-to-day challenges and really focus on delivering customer success to your customers.
Todd, that's perfect. Thank you so much for that. I'll make sure that all gets kind of written up and linked up and edited and things. Give you a big shout out on all your shameless plugs, and as well as all the work that you're doing at the Success Hacker. But just want to say thank you for sharing your time and kind of your insight with us today. That's been tremendous.
Well, I really enjoyed it, and thank you so much for having me as a guest.